So the first thing we're going to cover is how to add a gatherable to your scene, because they're a little bit less involved than producers, but it'll get us an introduction to the kind of way in which things work in the farming framework. So I've built some art, but I've done no organization of it yet. I haven't made it into templates or anything. I just did the kit bashing so that I wouldn't have to sit here and make you watch me do that. So I've got a couple parts. I have a flower that's going to be pickable around the town. I have a basket of flowers where you're going to hand in your flower to get paid in coins. I have an NPC whose bracelet is a terrible color. Let me fix that. So I've got my little NPC standing next to the basket. They're not going to do anything. I just thought I would make a person there so it looks like you're giving the flowers to someone in particular. And then the other thing I have is other things I have are a little bit harder to see. I have this, which is some paper burst. I have 2 paper burst VFXs here that I'm planning to use on the Gatherable later. And I also have this art that I've just hidden, which is going to be the collision for these things, which I should actually toss some better materials on that, just so if you do collide with them, they make better sound effects. Let's just go and put a leaf material on that, and on this, and we'll put a wood material, and that one doesn't really matter because it's an NPC. And then I normally turn my collision all red so that I know if I accidentally leave it visible. So that's what we've got to work with. So the first thing we're going to do is make some templates. I went into a bit of detail on how to do this in one of the tips videos. I'll link that in the description. For now, the main thing to know is that I am trying to make a template with the little pivot alignment to be at the bottom center. I'm making a second copy of this one, the flower. Well, actually I need 3. I need one that drops on the ground, one that grows in the world, and one that shows up in your inventory. I don't actually know which one this one needs to face. Probably have to fix that later. Oops, I did that on the outside. For the flower that you are going to pick in the world, we're going to need this capsule. So notice I have the word static added to this flower. That's to remind me that it needs to go into the static template. Things in the static template or in the static context can have collision and stuff like that. If it's in a client context, then it cannot. So plants and core, like the flowers and the little bushes, don't actually have collision on them unless you add it to them. They'll react to your character when you run through them, but you can't click on them to interact with our Gatherable system without giving them a collider. So you can see what I've got here, right? I have a group and I've got the name static here. And then inside this, I'm going to need 2 things. One of the groups I'm just going to call collision, and I'm going to put my capsule inside of there. And then I'm going to click on that group and I'm just going to set the visibility to force off. I'll set the camera collision to force off too for good measure. So now you can't see it. It's there, but it's not going to be interacted with. Just so that I can be consistent, in this case it wouldn't really matter if I put that flower in the client context or not, but just for consistency's sake, we're going to make a new client context. So it's just a folder, but it has a little picture of a computer on it, and we're going to put that flower inside of there. I'll just add the word geo to this. I just do this so that I know how to find things in my own things. This structure isn't really what matters. I just find that when you're using a system like the farming framework and you're going to have to make a lot of files, having a consistent structure is very helpful. So that's what with the flowers. This is going to be our gatherable that you pick in the wild. So we're going to go new template from object. Then we have these 2 are going to get spawned into a client context, so they're not going to have collision or anything. But the one that is the drop, this one here, you're going to want to make sure you can force it off either on the flower itself or on this folder here. Shut off camera collision, because this object, when you pick it up, is going to fly up towards your face. And if it hits the camera when you suck it into, it'll make your camera shake. And so that won't be very good. So that's all we have to do for those two for now. We're just going to make both of those into templates as well. Now this thing here, we're going to set up the same way we did this pink flower. We're going to make this all into one part that the player can click on. So I'll start by trying to just get the position right for the base of my object. This plane, we'll delete it. It's just a cheat I use to make sure that I have good pivots on my assets. So that looks pretty good. So I'll make a new group. Then I will clean off its scale because we just want it to be 1, 1. And I'll just delete this. Now I'm going to grab all of that stuff and I'm going to pull it into here for now. Oop, there's 2 things in there I don't want. I don't need the paper bursts yet. But now I'm going to organize this into 2 folders the same as I did before. So we'll make a new client context. This is where we put stuff that doesn't need collision. So this is just going to be geometry that's just decorative. And then we're going to make another folder. And this folder is going to be, or sorry, not a folder, a group. And it's not a client context. It's just a regular group. And that's where all the collision pieces will go. If you're ever trying to work with NPCs and you keep clicking them by accident, it's because they have a very big capsule box around them. That's their normal collision. And so when you're trying to do stuff around them, you can often grab that by mistake. So you might have to lock NPCs when you're working around them to avoid that. I turn that capsule on and off by hitting V. So in this case, we're just going to take these parts here and we're going to drop them in the collision folder. And then the rest of this stuff is the decorative stuff. We'll put that in the client context folder. We will take this, the collision folder, and we'll force off its visibility and its camera collision. Okay? And this one we're going to do, it's a gatherable as well, but it's going to work in a little different way than the other one. So it's a gatherable flower collection static is what we've called ours. We're going to create a new template from that. So that's the main assets that we need to make. We'll deal with the paper VFX when we get to that part. So the next thing that we need to do is set up some data in a table to hook that art up to something. So we'll go to items first, and then we'll click this button here, make it big so you can see. There's a lot of items here. This is going to work kind of like the mushroom where it's a rare find. So we'll copy that one and we'll paste that down here. Brown mushroom will just be like our example item that we move down. It's a good idea when you're getting used to the framework to pick the most similar item that exists and use that as your base. So we're going to call this pink flower. The next section is the display name for when a player's like interacting with it. So that's fine as pink flower as well. Description. We're going to need to change a couple templates. So we have the drop template here. Remember how we put drop in the name of this one? That is the template that will drop on the floor when somebody gathers this item. So we'll put that in there. And then the next one is the icon. So this is the one that'll show up in their inventory. And this hand look tool one is setting the behavior of the equipment, because this item is an equipment because you can hold it in your hand. That makes it an equipment. And you only need to change this if you're making something that needs like certain animations and things like that to place it. Most of the things in our game are set to the hand look tool, but you can poke around and see which things aren't. But I like it if they can see it in their hand when they're holding it. So I'm just going to use my drop template there again. You could make a custom template for that spot if you wanted. This details text and screen, that's for if you right click on the item in your inventory to get further information on it. We're not really using that in this case, but it's fine. Okay, so that adds the new pink flower item to the game. And we're going to go File, Save All, so that it saves the table. The next thing we need to do that's in this table is go to drops, because eventually our gatherable is going to drop this flower, right? Like when you click on the gatherable, you're going to be given this. So we're going to go Edit on the drops table. Again, we'll find our mushroom. The drops table covers anything in your game that can be given to the player. And there's 3 main categories of that. There's an item, a currency, or an upgrade. Only one of these columns will ever be in use in a single drop at a time. So the one we're setting up right now is an item drop. So we're just going to go to the bottom of just the items before we get to the next section, and then we'll add it there. It doesn't really matter. This is just for my own organization because this table's pretty long. So I'm going to paste it here and now do our renaming. And we're just going to name this, I don't know, pink flower drop, I guess is fine. It's a gatherable drop. And the actual item it drops is pink flower. Over here we have, it drops 100% of the time. This is the amount. It'll drop at least 1, and we'll make it so that it can drop up to 3. Now for weighted chance, that's if something you explore if you want to make more like a gacha style loot box. But for our case, we want the player to get a flower 100% of the time whenever they get this. So we're going to remember that's called pink flower drop. Now we're going to save what we did on that table. Okay, so the next thing we need is the gatherable itself. So we need a Gatherables table. Again, we're going to go find that brown mushroom. We'll copy it, paste it down at the bottom. We'll rename it to, I guess, harvestable pink flower. But the player will just see the word pink flower. Harvestable is just to remind us what it is. The gathering tool type is blank because you don't need a special tool to pick it. So gather effects, we could put a leaf effect. Let me see if I have one. I have a harvest plant, so we can put that there. It's probably going to play a little leafy looking explosion. These are instructions on how often it'll take to respawn and things like that. We'll leave that alone for now. Now this one is the drop ID. This is what we just set up, and we called it pink flower drop. So we'll put that there. That just tells it that when you gather it, that person should get it. Community means that everybody nearby can pick up one of these. It'll drop one on the ground for each player. The gatherable states, that's the art for it. So we're going to use the same ID just to make it easier on ourselves. And then we'll go into the, so this is another connection to the table. This is connecting to the GatherableStates table. That's why it says GatherableStates ID. File, save all, because we're done in this table. And then we'll go over to the GatherableStates table. Do the same thing. We're going to find our mushroom to copy, paste it down at the bottom. We haven't organized our templates that we added, so that means they're just right here in our templates folder. So I'll go there, and we only have one state for this one. It doesn't, get smaller as you harvest it. It's just you pick it and it's gone. So that's why we only need one piece of art. So we'll put that there. Now it says Gatherable Pink Flower. And this one needs to say, the ID here needs to match the table that we just did. So that says Harvestable Pink Flower. And this one here says Harvestable Pink Flower. Both of those have to match. And that's all we need to change here for now. That set up the first item, but there was one other thing that we need to set up. That's this thing, right? Like right now we have a way to pick a flower. We've added all the parts we need to add a flower to our game, but we need the flower hand in. We're going to add one more gatherable down here. And what did we call that thing? We called it a flower collection. Okay, so the tool that you're going to use on this flower collection thing is going to be a pink flower, right? Like you'll click on this flower basket with a pink flower and it will take the pink flower away and give you money instead. That's why it's like a hand in. So there's one catch here. This is a little bit of a more advanced thing, but to make the tables for farming a little easier to use, we removed some optional columns from here, and I'm going to have to put one of those columns back to make this example work. All of the available columns are, if you find the empty versions of the farming tables, they have a few extra columns that we've removed from the main farming ones, and one of them here is tools consumed per gather, and it's an int. We're going to add that column back into this table. You can't just add in random columns and have it work, but there are some columns that we allow you to add to have extra functionality. So we're going to just put it in the same place it is here. We'll hit insert column to the right. We'll click the type as an int because it's a number, and then we have to change this name right here. So if you want to add this column to your table so you can have this kind of functionality, it needs to be an int and it needs to be spelt exactly this way it is. It has to say tools consumed per gather with this capitalization, or the script won't be able to find it. Okay, most of these things 0 is going to be fine because most of these aren't consuming tools, but in our case we want to use 1 flower up every time they click on it with a flower. We're going to give the tooltip, click me with a pink flower to trade in 4 coins. Here's where we made our harvest effect for. I thought it might be nice to have something that looked a bit more fun when you trade in and get paid. So we're going to click on this one here. This is just an existing effect. We're just going to copy what it's done. We're going to look inside it. It has a paper burst. It's set to autoplay. That's probably all we really need to know. And then there's like a sound effect here. So let's de-instance this and let's abandon this template, right? Because now it's not attached to the original thing anymore and we can make a new template out of it. So let's call it flower hand in, and let's put our paper bursts inside and we'll just center them so that they're in the right spot. We'll move the old green leaf one because we don't want that. So we can also pick a sound to play to make it feel a bit fancier to hand in your thing. So we'll go to audio. Well, this seems like it might be promising. You probably can't actually hear this because I think that my recording isn't recording my computer's audio, but that's all right. I'm going to put a sound effect in here and I'm going to click autoplay on it so that whenever you click it and hand it in, it'll play these 2 paper bursts and it'll play a sound effect. Oops, that sound effect also needs to be centered with the rest of the thing. Okay, so we've got this new effect thing called flower hand in. We're going to create a new template from that. Now we're going to go back to the table we had again, and we're going to put the flower hand in effect there. Now the respawn seconds is kind of interesting in this case. We're going to hand it in, but we want it back basically right away. I'm just going to put 1 second there for now. We might have to fiddle around with numbers to get this to do what we want. We don't need an effect on that. So this is going to need a drop ID, but we can cheat a bit and take an existing one because this one's just going to give you some money when you hand in a flower. So let's go look at some of the money amount drops and see what they are. We have a bunch of coin ones. We could add another one, but we'll just use something that's already here. So let's say that you get 5 coins. So the ID for getting 5 coins is just coins 5. So we'll go back. We don't need this one now. That was just to show you that column. We'll go back to this Gatherables and we'll put that there, coins 5. Now in this case, we probably actually want to set the drop behavior to solo. We only want the player handing in the flower to get the money. And again, we'll just use this same thing as that ID. We put that same ID here, just like we did before. We put static here. There we go. So it now has its thing. And I'm also going to put the exact same template in gathered state. Okay, so that gathered state would be what you would use if you wanted to make, say, a metal ore node and you want the player to harvest the first one that looks like it has metal bits out of it, but you wanted to leave a bare rock behind, or you want to leave a tree stump behind that stays there till the thing grows back. That's the gathered state. Okay, so we have set up everything we need to make our gatherables. So I'm going to stop this video here because it's pretty long. And then in the next video, I'll show you how to actually put these in the world. Everything you need is built now. It's just a matter of putting them out in the world and testing them.